Okay, so by midnight tonight, we are running the risk of possibly having a federal government shutdown. Obviously, you've been in politics for a long time. When you hear of these deadlines where we get so close to a federal government shutdown, what is your initial thought behind it?
Kind of a mixed feeling. One, it's unfortunate because it does have detrimental effect in many areas if we shut down the government. But two, we've got to come to realize that we cannot continue to increase our spending and our debt, like there's no tomorrow, there's no reckoning. We are now spending $2 trillion more than we take in as the federal government. That adds to the debt. Now we're at 36.2 trillion debt overall and growing at 2 trillion a year. And that's just unsustainable.
When it comes to funding the government, are you on the side of we have to be more balanced in line with bringing in what we are doling out? Have that be more in line, be more parity there?
Well, when you think that the interest on the debt now is so large that we spend more there, over $1 trillion, we spend about 950 billion on national defense. So we're now spending more money on the interest on the debt. So we got to have a reckoning on balancing the budget, at least making some attempt to balance the budget. When you look at all the spending, for example, of the states and the local government, we spend a total of about $3.5 trillion per year, a lot of money. But the federal government is spending twice as much as that. And yet, when the founding fathers set this up, they said the powers we've given to the federal government are few and defined. Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution. And the powers we've given to the states are numerous and indefinite. We should be having more done at the local level where we have more accountability and more effective and efficiency in servicing the people through government. So it's a discussion we need to have. I'm a little surprised we had a bipartisan agreement ready to go, and all of a sudden Trump said no, and so the Republicans have backed off. That's a little bit disappointing. We've got to work together. I know that Trump doesn't think raising the debt limit is important. It's kind of nonsensical. In some ways, he's right. We do budgeting backwards in Washington. In the states and in Utah, we say, how much money have we got to spend? What's the total amount? Then we decide how to apportion it and create a budget. In Washington, they create a budget, and then they go back and say, oh, we need an extra $2 trillion to pay the bills on the budget we've already approved. Well, that's kind of backwards. And that's part of the problem we have with Washington, D.C. They're doing things backwards with a lack of common sense and with a lack of fiscal restraint and responsibility, which we, the taxpayers, are going to pay that burden. Someday we're going to have a major collapse, and it'll be because we're spending more money than we take in.
And if memory serves me, you were serving as governor of Utah during several federal government shutdowns. What does that do to the state when the Fed is closing up shop in parts of the federal government? I understand not the entire federal government shuts down during these, but what does that do to the state of Utah?
Well, non-essential services stop. Essential services continue on, but we say to the workers, we'll pay you later. They're furloughed. And you pay you a month later. It impacts, I'll just give you the example in Utah when I was governor, it shut down all the national parks. Well, it's like the Christmas season, in October for these people wanting to go and travel to our national parks. And so they're being shut down. It impacted a lot of local industries and businesses dramatically. And so I worked with the Department of Interior and said, this is silly. I mean, you've got walkways in your national in Washington, D.C. to your war memorials, and you put cones up there, orange cones, so that people couldn't walk on the sidewalk. I mean, that's silly. It doesn't cost anything or wear anything out by walking and looking at the monuments, but you're just doing that to irritate people, putting the blame with the opposite party. And they did the same thing at Zions. They had a lookout there off the state road. They coned off and had a ranger there to ticket anybody who stopped to take a picture, a photograph of the valley. Well, make a long story short, I called the Secretary of Interior and I said, look, let's keep these open. You can shut down everything else, but we've got to keep the parks open in Utah. I wired them a check for $1.1 million with the agreement they were going to pay us back, kept the parks open, saved a lot of local businesses. We did something unique that other governors called and said, how did you do that, Governor Herbert? How did you do that in Utah? Well, one, we sat down and had a negotiation and talk. I did it in 48 hours. Attorneys signed off on it. We had signatures made and money on the way, and the parks were opened up. But we had a willingness to do something and get it done to solve the problem. I wish they had more of that attitude in Washington, D.C.
Without intervention like that, though, these shutdowns can impact Utahns in a big way, can they not?
Oh, absolutely. Again, government services, loans being approved will stop being approved if you're trying to borrow some money. Social Security payments, government services will stop. Things slow down. It has a dramatic impact and a negative impact if we shut down the government. And then it takes a while to ramp back up once you open them up. So it's best not to do that. We don't have them. We had the longest one in history, I think, in November, December of I think 2018. So it's not a good thing, but we do have the problem of having a balanced budget requirement. I'm with a group of governors that are trying to put together a balanced budget amendment and make the Congress be forced to create and have a balanced budget amendment. I don't believe Congress will balance a budget of their own free will. I think they need to be forced to do it. They won't do it willingly, and they want to blame somebody else if they have to do it anyway, because there might have to be some entitlement reform. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, those entitlements are big number issues that need to be reformed and probably brought into control, at least so that our revenues match our outgoes.
Balancing the budget, the Utah way. Love to see the feds do that.
Yeah, common sense really will rule the day if we'll let it.
Kicking the can down the road with these continuing resolutions, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's not a good thing because we don't even know where they're spending the money. We don't know where we're going to find efficiencies. Things are not stagnant, things change. For example, in Utah, with our budget, we incorporated and brought on board a lot of technology. So we are open for government services 24/7, 365. You get your hunting license, pay your taxes. We're open all the time. And consequently, when I left office, we had a smaller number of laborers, government workers, than you had to go back to the year 2002 to find a smaller number. So we found efficiency in government that I wish they could find in Washington, D.C. And again, it's a matter of willpower and doing it. We have a lot of issues that become partisanship. And so we have people say, don't vote for it because that'll give them, the opponent, the Democrats, a win, or that'll give the Republicans a win. And so they don't solve the problem and the people suffer.
Do you care to comment on, from the seat that you sit in right now, knowing what you know, do you think we're going to shut down at midnight tonight?
Well, I've heard that Speaker Johnson's got a third alternative. So he's got a backup plan. We'll have to wait and see whether that happens. I hope they find a way to do it. It was a little disappointing that the President-elect Trump's come in and said, kind of kiboshed a bipartisan deal. But I think there's probably a lot of pork in it. There's probably a lot of reasons to be dismayed. And so I don't fault him for that. I do wonder why he said, let's do away with the debt ceiling. At least we have something that raises a red flag, says, my golly, we're having to raise the debt ceiling another $2 trillion because we're spending so much more than we take in. And so eliminating the debt ceiling, I'm not sure is the right thing to do, but it's certainly putting pressure on Congress to have to balance their spending, at least make an attempt to reduce the debt load every year. Now at 2 trillion, let's get down to 1 trillion, then get down to zero, and then start reducing maybe the debt altogether. Our overall debt as a country is over $100 trillion with all the debt we owe and that we will owe, and we have unpaid obligations for Social Security benefits in the future. So we owe a lot of money, and it's not something we should just pass off and say, hope things work out. We're headed towards a cliff, and we're going to go over it, and it's going to be ugly if that collapse happens.